Good morning again.
Good morning.
A man who is desperate for work applies to a zoo that he's heard has some openings. Well, it's a little unusual, but I do have something, said the zoo director. Our gorilla died some time ago, and we haven't had the money to replace him. If you're willing to wear a gorilla suit and impersonate an ape, you've got the job. Now, to this man, it didn't feel terribly authentic, but the man figured a job's a job, so he signed on. After a few awkward days, he began to get into the spirit of the thing, and soon he became one of the zoo's prime attractions. I wonder how goofy he had to act to do that. Thanks. For those of you that didn't hear that, my other half said I could do that. One morning, as he was swinging from one vine to the next with a little too much animation, he inadvertently swung himself right over the wall of his enclosure into the next one, which was occupied by an enormous African lion. The man could feel the lion's hot breath on his face. He knew he was a goner, and reflexively he began to scream for help. Wait! Ready? Then suddenly the lion whispered to him urgently, saying, "Shut up, you idiot, or we'll both be out of a job." Now that's a ridiculous story to say, oh, what a web we weave when first we plan to deceive, right? I imagine many, if not all of us, have known someone in our lives that just cannot seem to tell the truth, no matter how much they try. I can imagine it's extremely exhausting to try to remember what you've told to whom. Yes? Now, I've known some people in my life that do this very well, and others who just, when they get caught in the lies, tell more to cover the lies they have told, and then eventually what happens? They get caught and need to come clean. And it seems that what happens as a result of the lie after lie after lie after lie is far worse than what would have happened had they just told the truth in the beginning. At this point, I have to admit, I struggle with how someone can live like this. I mean, if you think about it, how do you know what is real versus made up reality when you live like this? And there are psychology terms for people like this, but I do not want us to get caught up in that this morning because there's more to our scripture passage than just the lies and deceptions that are happening in this story. But I did want for you to consider what the consequences of deceiving others has on those who are deceived, as well as those who do the deception. With me? Are you guys hearing that feedback, or is it just me? Okay. So, let's dive into the story a bit. To get us caught up a little bit, because we've jumped ahead in Jacob's story, we find ourselves just a short distance from where we left Jacob beginning with God, where we left Jacob battling with God, bargaining with God, and setting up a pillar of stones in Bethel. For perspective on this, let's consider these presumptions, because we don't know this for certain, but this is what we presume. The distance from Bethel to Haran was approximately 645 kilometers. That means it was just about 400 miles. Okay? Bethel to Haran. He was at Bethel, and he's on his way to Haran. This is actually considered the second part of his journey that we are covering, because he had already traveled about 95 kilometers or 60 miles from Beersheba to Bethel. So all told, he likely traveled about 460 miles from his father and mother to get to meet his future wife. Now that's a long way to go if you think about it. This also means that the actual travel time was substantial. The journey from Bethel to Haran would have likely taken over a month, covering about 550 miles. Because there was no straight path. And those of you who love geometry, what is the shortest distance between 2 points? Straight line, right? Yeah, well, there's no straight lines at the time that Jacob is traveling. ancient people's route of travel rarely followed those straight lines. In fact, in Old Testament times, the best route to any destination was following a stream or a river. The roads were laid out to avoid mountains and deserts, and they followed the rivers and streams so that they could always find water, which could add many more miles. Those of you who have driven, let's say, from here to State College know that there's no straight path, and there's a lot of rivers and streams and mountains to climb, right? Now, in this story, Jacob was either walking or riding a camel, both of which would have been very slow travel, because if you've ever watched a camel walk, they don't walk much faster than we do. So the extended duration of this journey underscores the amount of time and the physical demands that Jacob would have taken in his travel. Not to mention the isolation that he likely experienced during his flight from Esau's threatened vengeance. This is what we believe is the route of travel that he might have taken, and I hope you can see that on the wall this morning. And that gets us almost to today's story, which, as we will see, is all about deceptions, but also how often stories repeat themselves through the generations, and how when we do get caught up in deception, it often ends up coming back to bite us in a way that rarely ever feels good. But before we get there, we need to explore the last part of Jacob's journey, because I think it holds some insight for us. As Jacob is nearing Haran, the place where Abraham's servant found Rebekah, his mother, starting to see some of this trickling through, Jacob too sees a beautiful woman who literally takes his breath away. And in a grand show of gallantry, come on guys, you know you would have done this too, he steps up and moves this gripping huge rock away from the well so she can water her sheep. In doing so, they are introduced to one another. Jacob meets Rachel. This is the first instance where the stories repeat themselves across the generations. It's a chance encounter just like the one that his mother had with his father's servant. But in this case, that is where the similarities end, at least for now. Now, as a result of this chance encounter, Jacob becomes infatuated with this beautiful woman. Beyond that, he also discovers that he has found a woman that his father desired for him and directed him to find. His father told him, "You are not to marry a Canaanite woman from this area. You are to go to my father's land and to my ancient history, ancestral home, and marry a woman from my own tribe." Now, stopping here for just a second. Who is Rachel to Jacob? Anybody pick up on that? Yes. Rachel is Jacob's first cousin. Now, before you all shiver in disgust, this was what happened in ancient Israel. This is the traditions that they followed. This was the way that they ensured a strong family connection in line. It is also something that still happens in the Middle East to ensure a strong family line, okay? Do not get stuck here, but I need you to at least understand that they were cousins, just like Isaac and Rebekah. Okay? Keep that in mind. Now, when Jacob revealed who he was to Rachel, she, like her aunt, ran back to her family to announce Jacob's arrival. Much as custom detailed, Laban ran out to meet, and that's Rachel's father, to meet Jacob and invite him to stay with them for a while, which is exactly what Jacob did. He stayed with his uncle and two female cousins and any other family that might have still been there for a month. That's what we're told right before today's passage. During this time, we can only imagine that Jacob's infatuation with Rachel grows. So much so that he bargains with his uncle to have her as his wife, which is what the story is that we heard this morning. And Laban willingly offers. However, we also learn that Laban intends to make sure that his other daughter is married as well, right? Now, I have often wondered in this story whether or not Laban was a faithful follower, or if he might have been a heathen or a pagan. Whether he is really can make a difference in our story. And stick with me as I try to get to the heart of this. When we consider all that we have already heard in our stories this summer, there's one distinct similarity in all of them. Has anybody picked up on it yet? In each of our stories, God has chosen the individuals who will play a significant role. From Abraham to now Jacob, God has a conversation with each main character to explain how they will play an important part in God's plan, and ultimately the story of Christ's life. These are all mothers and fathers of our faith, each and every one of them. And so that makes me wonder about our supporting characters. Have they also received a message from God about their role? And that's where Laban kind of falls into this. While we'll never know the true answer to that question, despite being supporting actors, they each have a significant part, even if it is only for a short period of time. And again, this is Laban's part of the story. He seems to understand that Jacob being there with him is significant, and that Jacob is or would be a good husband. I mean, why else would he have given Jacob both of his daughters, right? His role as a father of daughters was to ensure that they would have a future. But Jacob must first marry Leah, kind of in an underhanded way, and only after he serves his uncle for 7 years. And so we have a story of a deceiver being deceived. Remember when we talked last week about how Jacob deceived his father to receive not only Esau's inheritance, but also his blessing? Yeah, well, this week Jacob is the recipient of that deception. Now, serving his uncle, expecting to be married to a particular individual, seeing Leah the next morning ought to have been a little bit of a disappointment. Yes? No? I'm just making sure you're still awake. Jacob had been promised Rachel in marriage, yet on the morning after the actual wedding night, Jacob recognizes, or rather realizes, that he had been duped into marrying his cousin Leah instead. And it's funny, but maybe not so funny, how things often come back to us when we do something to harm another. Or maybe this has only happened to me. In this case, the only thing Jacob ever wanted was to marry Rachel. Yet now he is married to Leah as well. And when he goes to Laban about the deception, Laban basically says, yeah, I know you married her. But you see, I needed my elder daughter to be married first. If you promise to finish the wedding week, as is the custom, you can have Rachel, but you must also work for me another 7 years. So there's the rub. Jacob gets what he wants, but so does Laban. Laban gets 14 years of free labor from his nephew, and he gets to have both of his daughters married in less than a month. Not a bad deal. But Jacob has to live serving his uncle for another 7 years, or a total of 14 years. While we think about how long 14 years really is in our lives, let us also consider the similarities that I mentioned before, because they play out in Jacob and Rachel's story as well. Consider this. Abraham and Sarah could not conceive until Sarah got out of God's way and let God work, rather than trying to make something happen for herself. Then Isaac and Rebekah could not conceive until Rebekah got out of God's way and both began praying for each other. Now we have Jacob and Leah, Zilpah, Rachel, and Bilhah, which are all four of the women he got in those 14 years. Of the 2 wives and the 2 servants that he got as wives, only one could not conceive, and that was his beloved Rachel. And yes, just like her ancestors, Rachel only conceived when she got out of God's way and stopped trying to make things happen for herself. Is there a moral in there? I think so. The foundations of our faith, trust, prayer, allowing God to work in God's time. Let me say that again. Allowing God to work in God's time. and believing that God is at work in and through us will get us through any challenge that we face. Any challenge. Does that mean we have to be perfect at it? I've already proved that this morning. No, we don't. All of the couples that we have discovered were far from perfect. And yet, they all received many blessings from God. So we too do not need to be perfect, but we do need to try to be better at all of the foundations of our faith. Yes? Whew. Often it's only our faith that gets us through the good and the bad times. We also need to remember that no matter what, deceiving those that we love will always come back to us in the end. Figuratively and literally. When you think about where you often get bitten. Amen.